Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show, coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality, pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. And folks, this is the show where we're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want to stay together. And if you're with that program, then please do give us a big thumbs up, and please do share the program, because that's the way that we tell Facebook and YouTube and Twitter that we're broadcasting, and that's the way that we encourage other people to come in and watch us and listen to us and comment and send us their greetings wherever you may be watching in this here United Kingdom or throughout the world. Please do send in your comments, and we love to hear from folk on TikTok as well. Good to see all the folk on TikTok coming in. Now, we have a big show for you tonight. At the bottom of the hour at 7:30, we have got a guest on, and it's going to be David Scott from Northern Exposure. And he's always got a lot to say about the state of the world, and we're going to be looking at some quote-unquote big wins which he wants to talk about, which have been happening throughout the world for the cause of the freedom movement. So David will be talking about that at the bottom of the hour. Now, if you're watching on TikTok, you won't see our guest, because our guest is on the computers on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube at /UK a Force for Good. And so please do send in your thoughts and your ideas, folks. And remember, we are teleprompter free, so we are not reading what some corporate person has put up on the teleprompter that we're just meant to parrot. This is the real thing. This is coming from deep down in the consciousness of all those who love the United Kingdom. Let's say good evening to the first person who came in tonight. That was Debbie Beer. Good evening to you, Debbie, and to Derek. And thank you, Derek. Derek has just sent us a super chat, which reminds us that if you're watching on YouTube, we are monetized now. So press the little $sign there at the bottom of the video and send us a super chat, and we'll be sure to read that one out. Derek says, good evening. As far as the SNP is concerned, it's one rule for them and one rule for us. Yet Sturgeon is nothing but a hypocrite. She condemns Johnston and then she changes the rules for her. And what else has she been hiding on her WhatsApp messages she and others have deleted? Well, we might be getting to that. We might be talking about that and wondering just exactly what it is that she's been doing. Hello to Adam. Coming to you as usual from the heart of the great British nation of England. We're going to be talking about England in our Busting Indy Myths Part 30, which is coming up. And hello to Catherine and to Alan, who's going to catch up on YouTube. Good, because once we've done our live broadcast, it's up there on YouTube for posterity, basically. And it's also automatically copied to Odyssey as well. If anybody's on odyssey.com, you will be able to see all our videos. They're all copied on odyssey.com. Hello to Derek. And Richie says, with all this talk of a war coming, I think it's time we withdraw all our forces home and defend ourselves only. Well, that's a good point to make, because Twitter is aflame today with the idea that we may have to reintroduce conscription to the United Kingdom, because it appears that the powers that be have got various wars planned for us in the future, using, of course, the bogeyman of Russia, which has always been a convenient bogeyman to scare the West for well over 100 years. So they're still doing it as well. And I was speaking to somebody earlier about conscription, and they said, well, in the old days, nobody would really have thought too much of that. And indeed today in some European countries where they have a degree of national service, it's just thought normal that, you do your national service and you're there to potentially get called back up again if your country was in a time of war. And that was certainly the way of looking at it. So what's happened in the intervening periods in the United Kingdom? Well, we've certainly kind of got away from that idea of national service. Once national service was abolished in the, couldn't give you a date, but what was it, late 50s, early 60s, then that whole idea of service fell away. And now we're at the stage today where it appears to many people that the political establishment doesn't believe in our nation's sovereignty. And therefore, how can they ask the people of the country to defend the nation when the politicians themselves are giving that national sovereignty away? I think that's the crux of the objection to conscription today. It's like if we had a political class that believed in the country, that believed in defending our borders, that believed in defending Britain's borders, and didn't allow tens of thousands of people to dinghy across the channel every year, then perhaps the people might be more interested in actually defending the country. But because the political class and media class have, in many people's view, just sold out the country, then there's not this great desire to defend, or rather to go and fight for. I think people would defend the country. If the country was being militarily invaded, people would defend it. But to ask us to go abroad to fight for obscure causes, I think those days are probably past in a way, especially with the degree of information that we have nowadays. And maybe arguably that's for the best, but it won't stop. It won't stop the political and media class trying to involve us in wars for their own either ideological points of view or for their own personal economic gain. So would you fight for the country? Give us your thoughts on that. I'm possibly too old now to be called up, but I would defend the country from invasion. I certainly wouldn't go over to a foreign land to fight for somebody else's cause, though, that's for sure. And I don't think I'm the only one as far as that's concerned. However, I do also like the idea of some kind of national service, some kind of peacetime national service. I think for those who want to do it, I think that's not a bad idea. I'm not advocating it, but I'm not against the idea as such. Anyway, user says, what chance have you got when you see morons saying bring it on? Bluebird says, we've already been invaded. I think a lot of people would agree with you on that one, Bluebird. Lynn Mayer says, I say time for mass conscientious objectors. Elvis70 says, what about sovereignty for Wales and Scotland? Well, we've got that. People vote for that within the United Kingdom. Christopher says, good evening to all on a chilly British evening. Chilly and blustery here in Scotland. The trains have not been running for 2 days, right? I mean, that's mental. Imagine not being able to run trains. And the excuses are given is that they've got to search the line for fallen trees. Well, it's not as if you've got a lot of lines even to search, right? Because this isn't like the railroads that we had, the railways that we had back in the 1960s prior to beaching, right? There's only a few main lines. And what are trees that are big enough to fall onto the line. What are they doing beside the line anyway? Shouldn't they be trimmed and kept down so that they don't fall on the trees or on the trains? Or is that just me being like having far too much common sense for my own good? Anyway, they started running again this morning, and I'm told that most of them are running by now, but knocking it off for 2 weeks does seem a wee bit crazy. Hi, Emma. Emma says we should talk about the piano incident. The piano incident. You know what? The piano incident has passed me by. Emma, I'm not sure what that incident is. Probably something tacky. Tepes says it's funny how the SNP are going to take nationalist out the name now. Well, that might be something to, whether they will or not, I don't know, but that's probably something to do with Humza saying that he was always a bit uncomfortable with the name national for some reason. Barry says, just drove from Inverness to Glasgow in a double-decker lorry with no problem. Bluebird says we need trees to breathe. That's true. Whether we need them to breathe right on the side where I'm trying to run my railway is another matter, of course. Bluebird says use the illegals to fight. Well, that occurred to me as well. It's like, yes, you can get asylum, but to get asylum you have to spend 5 years in the British Army, and you have to go without question to wherever you get sent. That's not a bad idea. Tepes says it's because Humza is a globalist. He wants to get rid of national identity. I think you're right there, sir. He certainly does. And that's the irony of the SNP. Basically, they're not that particularly nationalist. You know, they're happy to have Scotland's borders wide open. In fact, I did a meme. A Force for Good produced a meme this week outside of police outside the Scottish Parliament. We'll just bring that up, actually, outside the Scottish Parliament, the second meme that we did on this particular matter. There we go. 2 policemen there with guns standing directly outside the entrance to the Scottish Parliament. And the meme says, MSPs at Holyrood say we must have open borders because it's wrong to stop people coming in. Also, MSPs at Holyrood defend the front door with machine guns. And we did something similar outside with a meme outside Westminster. We'll stick that meme up as well. Basically, make Britain's borders as secure as the borders on Downing Street. And there's 3 policemen standing in front of that massive metal gate that exists at the bottom of Downing Street. Again, bulletproof vests, machine guns, and holsters with automatic pistols. So, yes, one borders for me, but not for thee, is basically the approach of our politicians at Westminster. Because Holyrood has fantastic border control. Westminster has amazing border control. Downing Street has exceptional border control. But the actual borders of the nation, not so much, unfortunately. What does that tell us? That the political and media elite love their own protection but don't really care about the protection for the rest of us. I remember this really hit me once. This was about 15 years ago. I went round to a newspaper office in Glasgow, and I can't remember why I was going round to it. I think I was wanting to hand in a letter or something like that, you know, back in the days when you wrote a handwritten letter to the papers rather than sending an email. And I thought, I'll take it round early, or I might get into tomorrow's press. And I got to the door, and it was like I may as well have tried to enter Fort Knox. I mean, it was just like, no way could you even get near this particular newspaper office. And I thought, that's interesting. They're behind this this complete wall, writing what they want about the rest of humanity, but humanity can't even access them. That was a kind of wake-up call when I realised that the media are not like your friendly local roving reporter at your local newspaper in a village or something like that. The national mainstream media are almost like a hostile force in some ways. At least that was the impression that I got after being rebuffed and not even being able to hand in my letter to this office, which shall remain nameless, by the way. Now, folks, remember we've got our guest coming up at the bottom of the hour at 7:30, and it is the one and only, the great David Scott from Northern Exposure. Ryan's watching from the West Riding of Yorkshire. Hope things are good with you, Ryan. There, Christopher kind of sums it up when he says, government is not keeping faith with the people of Britain. That is at the root of pretty much all our problems. That's right, keeping faith. You got to keep the faith, as George Michael so famously said. And if you don't keep the faith, then people are like, well, why can you ask me to go off? Why should you ask me to go off and fight and die for somebody else's cause in another part of the world if you're not keeping faith with your own country? Daniel Thomas says, my sons won't be fighting till the elites have sent their own to fight, and not as officers without brains, but as the fodder, as we are. Strong words. Emma says, of course, we are being invaded every single day, yet no one does anything anyway. That's right. You see, if these people coming across on the boats were armed, openly armed, then people would take a completely different approach towards them. And that's another thing that I don't have time to talk about just now, because what we're going to do is we're going to do Busting Indy Myths Part 30. Busting Indy Myths Part 30. Philip says he'd fight to defend the country but not abroad. I think a lot of people are with you there, Philip. Okay, Busting Indy Myths Part 30. And in this Busting Indy Myths, we are going to examine the oft-heard Indy myth that the Parliament at Westminster is the English Parliament. It's not the British Parliament. And to that, we will say that, sir, you are mistaken, because it's the British government, not the English government. Now, some people will say, Alistair, that's an awfully obvious point. Why would you even mention the fact that the Parliament at Westminster is British and not English? Well, the reason that I mention it is because you'll get people who are SNP MPs who have taken to referring to it as the English Parliament or the English government, or insinuating and implying that it's English and not British. Let me give you a for instance. And I came up with the necessity to point this out when I read this article. Cherry, by which is meant Joanne Cherry, SNP MP, Lord Advocate role has to be split. Now, the point of the article is that the Lord Advocate in Scotland shouldn't be part of the SNP administration, and I agree with that. But what was interesting is the way that she started talking about it. She wrote, I believe it is important that the role of Chief Prosecutor be free from all suspicion of political interference. That, after all, is what the English government enjoys. She says that, after all, is what the English, Welsh and Irish governments enjoy. The English governments? The English government? What's she talking about? She's talking about the British government, not the English government, because the British government at Westminster have the equivalent of the Lord Advocate, but not part specifically of the actual British government. But note she talks about it as the English government. Now she knows very well that it's the British government for all of the United Kingdom. She knows that, but she also knows that her supporters don't necessarily make the distinction. And she knows that if she plays on that idea that it's English government down at Westminster rather than British government, then she can play on that Scottish-English tension. She can appeal to her supporters, and she can start to generate the resentment that can develop from that. And so she deliberately wrongly describes the British government at Westminster as being the English government, because she knows that's appealing to the crowd, as it were. But as we know, there is no separate English government, and there's not actually a Scottish government either. It's an administration, it's an executive, it's an arm of the one and only British government. And we also know that that British government has a Secretary of State for Scotland who can ultimately call the shots, as we saw last year. And as we mentioned in our book, One Big Country, a big book for the Union, Volume 1. So always be aware that the SNP will try to confuse the constitutional issue deliberately, because they know that most of their supporters don't necessarily know about the Constitution, and so they want to play upon the England-Scotland tension in order to increase resentment among their supporters and among those who don't know any better. And that's a bad move on their part, but we've got to see it for what it is. So when people like Joanne Cherry tell you or speak about the English government, they are of course referring to the British government. It's the British government, not the English government. There ends Busting Indy Myths, Part 30. Fantastic. Now folks, in a few moments we've got our guest coming up, which is David Scott from Northern Exposure. But before we bring David on, we're going to do On This Day in British History. On this day in British history. Now, on this day, 24th of January, it's the 59th anniversary of the death of Sir Winston Churchill in 1965, who was born on St Andrew's Day, the 30th of November 1874. And he was, that's him there, he was to go on to, among other things, become the MP for Dundee for 14 years. 14 years Winston Churchill was the MP for Dundee, and not many people know that. That was between 1908 and 1922. Now for most people that would be a career almost in itself, but of course he went on to do other things after that, which we've no doubt heard about. And during the time that he was the MP for Dundee, he was also the Lieutenant Colonel who commanded the 6th Battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers during World War I. That photograph that's on the screen, by the way, is a force for good down there outside Parliament when we launched our London Town Unionists campaign on the 13th of November 2017. Great wee picture that we've done there. Okay, and there was a book written about Winston Churchill last year, about his time in Scotland. There it is, Cheers Mr. Churchill, Winston in Scotland by Andrew Liddell. Not read the book, so we can't comment on it, but looks an interesting read. Okay, we'll ask you a wee question about that in a moment, and the winner will get this fridge magnet, Union Jack fridge magnet, along with the latest magazine, which is King and Country, the autumn 2023 edition. which you can also get at our shop now, which is aforceforgood.uk/shop-1. Good stuff, good stuff. Now, talking about Winston Churchill, I was in Wetherspoons the other day, and I always like to read their magazine. And they had an article here, which is Winston Churchill's memo to the people that were writing reports for him. And it's dated 9th of August 1940. And he talks about the importance of concision when writing. And I'm just going to quote one or two things here, because I've read this before. I read this many, many years ago, and it really stuck with me, because concision is absolutely where it's at. Concision means the quality of being short and clear and expressing what needs to be said without unnecessary words. And we'd like to think that we do that at A Force for Good in our magazines and in our books, and also on our programme. And he says, brevity. To do our work, we all have to read a mass of papers. Nearly all of them are far too long. This wastes time, while energy has to be spent in looking for the essential points. I ask my colleagues and their staff to see to it that the reports are shorter. 1. The aim should be reports which set out the main points in a series of short, crisp paragraphs. 2. If a report relies on detailed analysis or on statistics, these should be in an appendix. 3. Often the occasion is best met by submitting an aid memoir consisting of headings only. And 4. Let us have an end to such phrases as, it is also of importance to bear in mind the following considerations, or consideration should be given to the possibility of carrying into effect. Most of these woolly phrases are mere padding which can be left out altogether. Reports drawn up on the lines I propose may seem rough as compared with the flat surface of official jargon, but the saving in time will be great, while the discipline of setting out the real points concisely will prove an aid to clearer thinking. I like that. The discipline of setting out the real points concisely will prove an aid to clearer thinking. And that mentality is what guided us when we wrote our new book, One Big Country, a Big Book for the Union, Volume 1, which you can find by searching for One Big Country on Amazon. Just put in One Big Country on Amazon and you'll get this book. And we're selling daily. So it's being appreciated. And if you've bought a copy, please do consider writing a review as well for us, because the Nats come in and they write all these fake reviews, which can sometimes be quite amusing in their ridiculousness, but we want to get the real reviews in there. So if you've bought a copy, you can go in and leave a positive review and tell us what you think about it. One Big Country. Search Amazon for that. Okay, now we're going to bring on our guest in 30 seconds, but before we do that, folks, I'm going to ask a question for this. And send your answer, please, to contact@aforceforgood.uk. And the question is, Winston Churchill was the MP for 14 years for which Scottish constituency? I did mention that. So if you know, send in your answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk and you could win this. If you've never done it before, you're in with a good chance. And you'll also get a free copy of our latest magazine, which is worth £4.50. Now, folks, on TikTok, we're going to be speaking now with our guest. And you're not going to see or hear the guest unless you go to youtube.com/UK A Force for Good. But stick around. You'll still be able to hear me if you want. So, folks, please say hello to a show favourite, which is David Scott of Northern Exposure. Good
Hello,
evening to you,
Alistair.
David.
Hello, Alistair. How are you tonight?
Very well, thank you. Very impressed with your dazzling new studio there.
Do you like the lights? The lights are quite cool. And
Yes,
um, and I managed to get red, white, and blue on just for your show.
thank you, thank you.
Uh,
Good.
I enjoyed your quote from Churchill there. He was absolutely right on the whole brevity. I'm an engineer. I do a lot of technical reports. They all start with a one-page executive summary, and it's bullet points. And if you can't reduce it to that, you haven't thought it through. So he was absolutely right. And on his link to Scotland, he was once criticised of having no connection to Scotland, and he said to the person, "Yeah, nothing apart from my constituency, my regiment, and my wife," which I
Absolutely.
thought was quite a good put down.
Yes, yes. Well, I was amazed because when I found out that he had been an MP, I mean, he had a massive career. He was born at that time in history when basically everything important that happened, he was the age for it, as it were. And I never knew that he had been the MP for Dundee, and not just like for a term for 3-4 years, but for 14 years. I mean, most people just retire after that.
Do you happen to know who unseated him?
I do, because I did look into it. Was it somebody who was campaigning against the demon drink,
It
basically?
was it was a temperance candidate,
Hmm.
and the first time he stood, he got a derisory a few dozen votes, and he stood again, and he got several hundred votes, and he stood again, and he got several thousand votes, and he stood again, and he won, and it just shows you just what a popular movement the temperance movement was in Scotland in the 20s and 30s. My mother was born in a steel town, a steel village in Lanarkshire, in 1919, and in her early life on Sunday they weren't allowed to play because it was Sunday, and they all the kids from the entire village, they all went to the Church of Scotland Sunday School, which was a bit boring. They didn't really like that one. They went to the Mission Sunday School, which they liked because it was jolly and they would play games and sing. And they all went to the Band of Hope, right, which was the temperance movement. And all of the kids in the entire village went to the Band of Hope, and they all swore off the demon drink. And I think to her dying day, my mother still had a view that although she would take a sherry at New Year's, it really wasn't entirely proper. I think that stayed with her, a, a view that there was a lot of potential harm in there, as indeed there is.
Yeah,
So yeah, the
yeah.
temperance movement was huge.
Yes, absolutely, and a massive social movement throughout the United Kingdom at the time, and no doubt because it was socially destructive. You'd get guys who would be working hard all the week, and then they get their pay, and they'd blow it all by the weekend, and that would be very bad for the families and so on.
It was
So
it was socially destructive, but there was a grassroots campaign against it. When we look at the drug problem we have in Scotland now, and there is no grassroots campaign against anything. We're looking at the government to do something, and frankly, that's not going well. And there isn't the intellectual work being done to give people other choices.
what do you mean by that? The intellectual work being done to give
Well,
people other
well
choices?
the whole purpose of the Band of Hope is it gave people information. It gave people reasons not to give into the demon drink. It gave people information. It gave data and an understanding of what the downsides were. And it informed people, and it gave them reasons to choose other paths. And that was coming from the grassroots, and we don't see the equivalent. And it's quite striking that we don't see the equivalent, although arguably the harm that's been done by drugs now in our country is every bit as bad, maybe even worse, than alcohol 100 years ago.
Yes, yes, yes. Interesting points. Interesting points. Anyway, to talk more positively about things that have been happening. Well, firstly, you have got this new studio, Northern Exposure. Would you like to speak a couple of minutes or a few minutes on this new project that you're working on?
Yeah, so we've got basically four strands, three at the moment, shortly to be four strands to this. Firstly, I'm publishing written material on Substack. Substack, I'm only now on it for, I think, 3 weeks or so. It's a really nice platform. It works awfully well. There's a big audience engagement. And I've been very, very impressed with it. So I'm publishing written material on Substack, and that's digging deeper. NE at Substack is the address. If you go into Digging Deeper David Scott, you'll find it. And we've looked so far at some of the history of how the state has interacted with families, and some of the history of the NHS and eugenics, amongst other things, both from a Scottish perspective. So that's written material there. And I've started two video platforms. One is a review and an analysis program. It's called Notes from the Edge. The introductory one of those is up, and that will be a regular series that will go on for, I hope, a long time. And the other one is an interview series called Necessarily So, and this is to get people in who've got something important to say with information that can change a person's worldview, allow them to see the world differently, or that exposes things that most people accept as the truth that just isn't so, that just isn't backed up by the evidence. So this is the type of people that we'll be interviewing. Episode 1 of that is also up, and I started with Kevin Ryan, who's a 9/11 whistleblower. And I started there because so many people who see things differently started when they realised that the story of 9/11 was full of holes and did not make coherent sense. And they started looking into that. So that was a good starting point for our interview series.
Well, talk about a starting point. That's going straight into the deep end on that particular subject. So if that's what you started with, who knows what's going to be coming next? Because that's certainly a very interesting field. I'll tell you something, and I thought you might mention that, so I lined up a couple of pictures that we'll put up in a second. I was in New York back in 1985, and I had the privilege of climbing up World Trade Center Tower 2 I didn't climb up it as such, I got carried up by a lift, but to the viewing platform. And I took a photograph. I was just snapping photographs looking down. And would you believe I actually snapped World Trade Center 7 in construction. And we'll put up the first photograph of that here. Now that's the view looking down from World WTC 2, looking down at WTC 7. See it being constructed there?
Yes.
And
yes, because WTC 7 looks quite diminutive next to the Twin Towers, but of course it's a huge building in its own right.
Absolutely, and a close up on that is that. So that's what it looked like inside, and I've never seen that photograph or photographs like it in any of the documentation on this particular matter. So that's I just thought I'd put that up there just for interest. Okay, so that's video programs on YouTube.
Yes,
that you're doing.
And the one that it's on YouTube. I will get it on other platforms just in case YouTube gets sticky, but it's on YouTube at the moment. And the one other program I'm hoping to get launched sometime next month is a once a week, probably Sunday, news review. What the papers say, and we might even time it to overlap with the BBC's version of reviewing the news of the week. So that will have guests, and so I'll have 2 people joining me every week for that. So that's
okay. Well, good luck with all of that work. You've certainly got your work cut out for you. You've cut your work out for yourself, whatever the expression is. So I'm sure these will be extremely interesting programs. And basically, go to youtube.com and search for David Scott Northern Exposure, or it's also there at Northern Exposure 9510 is the full address for people who want to subscribe to you, and we'd certainly encourage people to do that. Now, what about the good news, as they say? You mentioned that there's one or two things that have been happening worldwide that you'd like to elaborate upon.
Yeah, it's been a very positive start to the year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's been things that have not been going well, but there have been many things that have gone in a very interesting and positive direction. Now, firstly, I thought we should start with Humza announcing that he's not a nationalist. Did you catch that one?
Yes, I didn't know what to make of that. What did you make of it?
Well, this is Humza being not the sharpest knife in the box, because this is, of course, true. The SNP and Humza, the policy is entirely anti-nationalist. It's globalist, it's communist, it's far left, it's internationalist. It is not nationalist. Now, Nicola did admit this as well, but of course they play on the nationalist card and they get votes based on the nationalist card. So they essentially get votes by deception. I would say probably the majority, maybe 2/3 of the votes they get largely by deception. Now, if you're getting 2/3 of your votes by deception, it's not really very clever to tell everybody about it. And that's what Humza has done. So on top of other issues to do with his brother-in-law, it's not been a great start for the SNP to 2024. But I thought that was it was interesting that he made that admission, and I don't think it was very wise. Now, the next bit of good news actually came in 3 sections, and this all came from courts in England. I think it is quite striking that it's coming from courts in England, which are better and stronger defenders of liberty than the courts in Scotland, to the latter's shame, I would suggest. And these were all cases where people had been hounded by the state over essentially wrongthink. They said the wrong thing, they had the wrong opinions, and they came after their jobs. The first one I've got here is Rachel Mead. She was a social worker in England. And there was a complaint made. This is how it always starts. An activist sees something they don't like and they decide to come after your job. So there's a complaint made about her Facebook posts. They were said to be discriminatory in nature, and an investigation was started. She was suspended on charges of gross misconduct, which is, of course, an instant sacking offence. And the claim was her social media posts were transphobic. The council investigation reported that holding discriminatory beliefs is of significant concern given her position of trust as a social worker. Right? So she was being told she could not think what she was thinking. And of course, what she was thinking, if you go back only 25 years, was entirely standard, and everyone believed it in the entire country. So this is about how the left force and coerce and bully people into pretending to believe something else. So it all went to court, and the courts found totally in her favour. They said they don't consider the respondent struck a fair balance between the claimant's right to freedom of expression and the interests of those who perceive may be offended. They said freedom of speech invariably will involve the right to, on occasion, cause offence to some people, and it's clear this does not preclude an individual's ability to express such views. And it said the continuation of a disciplinary process from November 21 onwards constituted harassment. Right? So they absolutely slated the officials. And for everyone, including you and I, Alistair, who wants to speak honestly and openly about what they believe, this is an enormous victory.
Okay.
Mead's solicitor said the judgment sounds an alarm for all regulators and all employers of regulated professionals. They must not let their processes be weaponized by activists bent on silencing the debate on freedom of speech. This case was on gender, but it applies across the board. Now, you know all about activists trying to silence the debate because you've had to put up with it for years. So I think that's enormously good news. So we had here The Guardian. The Guardian had to report on this. Westminster City Council found to have discriminated against Rachel Mead. So she was charged with holding discriminatory views, and actually who was discriminating? It was her employer and regulator who were discriminating. So
that's a very unusual ruling. And who was it that made the ruling?
It's a tribunal. So
yeah.
it'd be an employment tribunal.
Right. Well, that's definitely a step in the right direction. Right. We always go one step forward, one step back, because there's somebody convicted today of putting up stickers under the so-called hate speech laws, and they were anti-immigration stickers, and they weren't actually nasty to anybody. They were just pointing out, Britain's going to be whites are going to be a minority allegedly by 2066 or whenever it was, and he got done for it, and he's
insane.
He's facing up to 7 years, but he hasn't been convicted. This has been sentenced yet until March. Hopefully he'll get a suspended sentence, but it is insane. But there's always, within that insanity, there's also sparks of hope, such as the one that you've just mentioned about the woman at the tribunal being able to get off.
I'll give you another two quick ones, but before I do you remember John Swinney's? Someone posted in Perth on lampposts little stickers saying it's okay to be white, and Swinney went public that this was appalling, and the most terrible thing he'd ever seen. Really, John, it's not okay to be white? Okay, That's an interesting position, and it shows their complete lack of intellectual honesty. It shows a complete lack of any sort of clarity of thought, and what they're doing is trying to coerce and browbeat people. And I hope the case which you've just described, that very shortly we'll get those cases being overturned as well, because I think that's utterly nonsensical. Two other cases. This is in 1 week. Open University academic Professor Joe Phoenix, who was compared with the racist uncle at the Christmas table when she was sacked from the Open University because she has gender critical beliefs. Right? She's a lesbian. She's probably far left. She's probably not someone that politically I would identify with, but she was hounded out of her position because she didn't agree with this nonsense over gender. She has also won her tribunal case.
Okay.
And Mayor Forstater has also won a case. She was discriminated against over gender critical beliefs. She lost a job in a think tank after tweeting that transgender women could not change their biological sex. I mean, simple statements of fact. She's won her claim that she was unfairly discriminated against because of her beliefs. So I don't see how we can be supporting all of these women over gender and still locking people up because they have views over nationality that are simply expressing a view that's not in accordance with The Guardian.
Yes. Well, I agree, and I think that things are beginning to change, especially with other platforms, freedom of speech platforms, even on Twitter, for example, under Elon Musk. There's not the feeling anymore that you have to walk on eggshells. Obviously, you always have to be careful just normally anyway. But the sort of verboten topics of the past, or even points of view, are much more casually mentioned now without any blowback. as it were. So I think things are changing. I feel that when people are allowed free speech platforms, then everything gets back to normal again and finds a better balance. And that's hopefully maybe where we're moving.
Certainly the issue of immigration is now come firmly into the mainstream, and rather than being a kind of third rail that no one could touch in case it eliminated their career, it's now being discussed openly in the Telegraph and elsewhere. So a whole series of subjects that simply weren't being examined are now starting to be examined and are going to be huge. I saw your tweet earlier today about the lack of border controls, and I think that's a viewpoint that very many, I'm sure the majority of people in the country now share, and that move will not, that genie will not go back in the bottle. That move will be permanent, and it will form a big part in the next election and the one after that. So it will now have to be debated. Yes. Now the other big win, which was only yesterday, I think, was Canada. Right. Mm-hmm. So the Canada truckers protest was closed down using quite brutal suppression techniques, much of it financial, by Trudeau's government. Well, a Canadian court has ruled, Tuesday, it was yesterday, that the use of the federal law against the truckers was unreasonable and illegal. They said the use of the Emergencies Act does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility. And the Federal Court Justice Richard Mosley, interesting name, I conclude that there was no national emergency justifying the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and the decision to do so was therefore unreasonable and ultra vires, which means, of course, beyond the scope of the law. So they broke the law, they contravened the Constitution, and the truckers were right. Now, that's only just happened.
Excellent.
The Canadian government's going to appeal, and hopefully that's laughed out of court as well. And I would like to see the many, many financial claims from many truckers now pour into the Canadian government, who will, of course, be liable for all losses given the fact that they acted unlawfully. This will be, hopefully, a long-lasting shellacking for the totalitarian Canadian government.
Well, that would be absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic if that happened. That judge, what level of court was that?
That was federal.
Federal.
That was federal, yeah.
Which, is that equivalent to like their Supreme Court or the...
I wouldn't like to say. My knowledge of the Canadian justice system is a bit ropey.
Yeah,
but it's reasonably senior. This is not something that can be ignored.
No, it's absolutely excellent news, and it sets people, it starts to put things right. So that's excellent, because that was a wake-up call to so many people in the Anglosphere world that the government of an Anglosphere country could literally shut down your bank accounts when that happened as well. It was just horrifying, actually. Absolutely horrifying to discover.
And the fact that it was a move against liberty, it was a move against people expressing themselves.
That as well, obviously,
It was deeply totalitarian, and we saw it in Australia, and we saw it here. We've had people here have their bank accounts removed. People and I know have had their bank accounts removed simply for saying the wrong thing. We've got Lawrence Fox now can't get a mortgage to buy a house in the UK because he spoke up against left-wing politics.
And that's something that to this day makes me look on the main political parties as like almost enemies of the people in a way, because the first thing that Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer should do is say, look, we are going to pass a law that guarantees every British citizen the right to have a bank account. And I'm told that we used to have this ability via the post office, was somehow able to set up bank accounts for people, but that should be if you're a British citizen, you should never be denied the ability to bank, especially considering we're moving into the digital age. We're in the digital age of money. So, but the fact that this is not a concern for any major political party, that in itself speaks volumes about what on earth is going on and what on earth is their attitude towards the freedom of their own citizens.
This is a very good point. The political parties are very similar, and they're very. There are a lot of huge issues out there. There are really significant, and there's barely a single politician who's able to string a coherent sentence together to actually highlight the issues that really matter.
Yes.
And there's certainly no leadership. What we've got is it's the bland leading the bland. It's very mushy. It's ill-defined, and it's heading down paths that no one wants and that haven't even been discussed.
Yes, absolutely. Daniel Thomas here comes in and says, doesn't the truckers' ruling blow out the water the reasons and justifications for lockdowns all over the world? That's it certainly begins to question it, I would say. Christopher points out the cancel culture is rife across universities and that diversity is another trope that needs to be challenged and dismantled.
Diversity, inclusion, and equity need to be challenged.
That's the one.
Particularly the last one.
The DIE or the DIE agenda.
Yes.
We're getting to the top of the hour here, David. So what I'd like to do is just remind everybody that you can be found at Twitter, which is now x.com/Albion_Rover. And you're also on Substack at Digging Deeper NE, all one word, at substack.com. And if people want to find you on YouTube, you're at youtube.com/at Northern Exposure 9510, or simply search for David Scott and Northern Exposure, and they'll get to your ever-growing library of materials. And I noticed you're doing well already on Substack. You've got at least 200 subscribers, which is very good considering you've only been on for a week or two.
Yeah, it passed 250 the other day, and that's in less than 3 weeks. I'm about 5,000 views on the material I've put up on Substack in those 3 weeks, which is way beyond what I was expecting. The YouTube channel's been moribund for a long time, but has quite a lot of followers. It's got nearly 10,000, and that's now picking up further as well. So it's early days. It's only the first couple of weeks, but there will be a lot of content. There should be regular content. Should be both video and written material every week. And anyone who wants to comment on it, please do so. And if you want to comment directly, it's northern_exposure@protonmail.com is my email. Drop me a line if you agree, disagree, if you want something looked at, if you simply have a viewpoint that's relevant to something I'm talking about. Please let me know, because all of the feedback is really valuable and will form part of some of the programming going forward.
Fantastic. Well, we wish you the greatest success with your events, and we look forward to having you back on the programme during the course of this year to report on your latest investigations and reports. So, David, just to say thank you very much for coming on the show tonight.
It's been a real pleasure, Alistair. Hope to have a live event as well later in the year, and we'll be inviting you to that if you can come along and be part of that.
Absolutely.
More on that one later.
Great stuff. Okay then, David. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. That's David Scott of Northern Exposure. And we don't have a winner this week. Maybe the question was too complicated, but that's okay. We'll carry it over to next week. Catherine says, thanks, David. Nice one. Christopher says, great contribution and analysis, David. Ian says, happy belated millennial. Daniel Thomas says, very interesting show. Thanks for reading my question. It's our pleasure, Daniel. Thank you for sending in your comments. And please do make a date with us every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. Now, just going back a bit, Emma gave a good explanation here of what she meant by the piano incident. And I now know what you were referring to. It was a piano that was being played in by a pianist, and he was asked to stop. And yes, I see what you mean now. I hadn't been following it, but I had heard about the actual issue itself. So thanks for giving us your explanation. And any other comments? Quite a few comments coming in tonight. Thank you very much for everybody who sent them in. Sorry I wasn't able to read them out. Ian says the D in devolution means down, as in delegate, not unmerge, not separate. It is not a reversal of anything or a flow of power from Scottish seats back to some old parliament. Rather, it's the delegation of the powers in a British parliament to the Scottish level. And thank you for that, Ian. We developed that point in this book, One Big Country, which anybody can find, and which we encourage people to find by going to Amazon and searching for One Big Country. There you go, search Amazon for One Big Country. And folks, if you do buy a copy, please do drop us a review at that site on Amazon, and also please send us a photograph of your book and set it up like in your garden, or set it on top of a monument or a memorial, or take it out into the sunshine and take a picture of it in the park or whatever. Anything just to push the book, send it to us, and we'll use that to flog the book across our social media platforms, like the One Big Country book on tour. I remember we did that with the wee book, and people were taking it on holiday and taking a photograph of it next to the pyramids and stuff like that. Well, nobody actually took it to the pyramids, but they certainly took it to the south of Spain and elsewhere. And so please do consider that as well. Okay, folks, we'll be back next week, hopefully with another guest. And cheers for all the points of view that you said. Great show tonight, really loved it, good energy. Thanks to everybody on TikTok. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next time.